What's good, everybody? It's your boy Big Nate. Welcome back to Big Nate's Book Reviews, home of the best book reviews. I know it's been a minute, but your boy is back and we are doing a dope ass book. I'm coming back hard. I'm coming back strong. Today we are reviewing The Republic, one of the most famous books in the entire world, entire history of literature, by Plato. You might have heard of him. So today we sparking up big old fat doobie. Today we smoke. I just came back from the dispo. We got that Maraschino Breath 9. Who even knows what that could be? The Maraschino Breath 9, but we're about to find out. It's a mix of that cherry lime dog and that black dog, cause I got that dog in me, you already know. Got that black coffee, and I'm not gonna front like it's no cream or sugar. It's no cream, but it's sugar, the middle way. So I'm gonna sip on that. Delectable. And today we got a dope ass, not a book haul. We got a dope ass book review. So we finna pop it. You already know. Open it, and then while I spark the doobie, welcome back, Big Nate. YouTube missed you. The YouTube streets been missing you. They've been asking for me back, and and here I am. Enough with the pleasantries. Let's get straight to the beef, straight to the meat of the matter. The Republic. This book, written in 375 BC. Talk about old head. It does not get much does not get much more old head than this. So do the math. 375 BC. That is, it's practically, it's like over 2 millennia year old. A millennia is 1,000 years, I believe. So we got a legendary old end. Of course, Plato. This is like doubles as Plato, Socrates. I'm just gonna use them interchangeably. Like, honestly, it's kind of an interesting question. Is the Republic the ideas of Plato, or is Plato simply the transcriber of the ideas of the Republic, being Socrates? Because I'll just say from the rip, this book is written first person. It's like actually very. We'll talk about this, I hope, if I have time. We have a lot to cover. But the book is actually, it starts out like literally like an actual, like a fictional narrative where Socrates is like first person. He's talking like I went and he sees the homie Glockin in them, and they're at like a Coliseum event, and it's like what, like the whole first few pages of this book, nothing to do with philosophy at all, really. I mean, they be talking and shit, but really the homies just link up after like the festival, and then Glockin or someone, I'm pretty sure it's Glockin, they're like, let's pull back up to my place, get some contemplation going, and then next thing you know, we got the foundation of entire, matter of fact, that reminds me, there's a really good quote, I think, that just sums up the importance of Plato. I mean, I feel like it's already implied, but philosopher and mathematician Alfred North Whitehead told Big Nate to hit this doobie before he said the following quote. He said, the safest general characterization, it's something like this. The safest general characterization of Western philosophy is that it consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. And you, like, if you're into philosophy at all, you probably heard that, like, there's like a popular blog called Plato's Footnotes that plays off on that quote. The idea is that literally, it really is not an understatement to say all of Western philosophy, and I would say by extension Western literature, is based upon, it does not exist as it does today without the Republic. So we got a dope, like I'm saying, all of this is to say we got a dope ass book. The Republic is essentially, like, if I had to describe this book, because it's a lot of things, but in a word, or like in a sentence, briefly, the Republic is, I would say, it's Plato and the homie, or really Socrates and the homies, but let's just say Plato and Socrates, building a society from scratch in this sort of like Socratic dialogue back and forth, really just at the end of the day, conversation. Oh, what the bro sounded like a just through conversation, they build this, they almost thought experiment style build this entire republic from the ground up based off of like first principles. And the whole reason they even go down this whole thing is they're actually, like, the very beginning, like, prompt of the whole discussion is them trying to figure out the nature of justice. What is the nature of justice? The nature and origin of justice. And kind of in like that broader sense, not in the terms of like legal penal justice, but like capital J justice. And Socrates is basically like, all right, let's start from the very top. Before civilization, right? Before there was any such thing as the Republic, any sort of governing civilization at all, basically it was a free-for-all. Everyone's acting in a self-interested manner, harming others for their own benefit, right? It's just like a free-for-all. But then he says, after some time, people eventually realize that, like, whatever benefit you gain from basically fucking someone else over for your own benefit, whatever you get from that is just far outweighed by if everybody kind of just chooses to coexist and kind of help in a mutualistic way, the quality of life just gets so absurdly better that it's just almost something people naturally tend to do. Like this is the origin of, he says, of justice, and then therefore of society. Like we just realize eventually everybody sort of makes like a unspoken compact, and this is the origin of laws, and everyone kind of exists harmoniously in a community. And like that's the first seeds, the germinations of society. And then at some point Plato's like, let's just take a step back and think too, like how should this republic be led, in what manner, like who should be the person leading this, and how should they act? And he said, basically, he's like, just as a good doctor prescribes not for his own self-gain, but like for the actual benefit of the patient, and just as a good captain gives orders not for the benefit of himself as the captain, but for the betterment of the whole crew, he says, so too should the leader of the republic act in a way that benefits. And take notes here. Just put a little pin in this. There's going to be a lot of modern relevance from the insights of this book. So, but what Plato is saying, he said, it's just like in the same sense of all those others, a leader should act not for their own interest or for the interest of like a small group of people, but rather for the betterment of the entire society. So just think about how Plato's ideal society, how that squares with our own. I'm just gonna sort of throw that out as food for thought. So one of the moves that Plato eventually goes on to make is this idea, and this actually goes, I feel like, dates back to many of the mystical traditions just in general. And if you ask me, Plato was a mystic, yes. But it's the idea that of the macrocosm and the microcosm and the macrocosm, that the two of those are just reflections. They're two different scales, but reflections of one another. It's almost just like scaled up. So when he's talking about a society, he's like, well, let's think about this. A society, he said, they're not made of sticks and stones, but rather of individual people who, by turning of the scales, will choose the direction of the entire society, right? Societies are made up of people, he argues. So if we can understand the person, we are going to, by extension, learn something about society. So Plato has this really interesting analogy to sort of think about both of these, because like I said, the individual and the society can be thought of as having like the same analogous part. So he says, imagine, and this is his concept, this is sort of his worldview analogy for both of them. He says, imagine like this 3-part chimerical beast, and on like the very bottom of this beast is like this many-headed sort of animal that's like tearing you this way and that way, and it's frenzy and it's chaotic, and it's just like this totally base ass animal. So he says at the level of the individual, what this represents is essentially just our base natures, our animal natures. When you think about how just we constantly want this pleasure, that pleasure, and the second we get our pleasure satisfied, another one pops up, and we're going this way and that, and in that way we are like that many-headed beast, right? That's like the individual element of it. At the societal level, he basically views the many-headed beast as like the masses, who are just who Plato would argue are just generally unthinking, uncontemplative. Their opinions are easily swayed, very easily impressionable, and again, they sort of represent the more base elements of like a society, you could say. So that's on the one end. On the other end of this chimerical beast is like literally a human being. And this, of course, is supposed to represent the thing that which makes us human, that which separates us from like, the lower animals. It's like, it's our capacity for reason, logic, rationality. It's that which is like what the ancient Greeks and them viewed as being like that divine aspect of the human. So at the level of the society, at the level of the republic, the human being basically represents like what Plato is going to go on to propose as being a philosopher king. And the philosopher king is basically someone who has dedicated their entire lives to the pursuit, of course, of philosophy. The philosophy basically being just an inquiry into the nature of all things, just knowledge in general, right? And the idea is they would act in a completely unselfish way for the betterment of the entire society, right? Like a good example of a philosopher king would be Socrates himself, who is just like this purely has no care for worldly goods, is in it for the intrinsic goodness of knowledge, and would be someone you would imagine who actually could make this happen. So that's the philosopher king, right? That's the human side. In between these two beasts is like lions, and at this point, if you're like me, even at the second point, I completely don't have like a mental image, because he's describing it like it's an actual like creature. But so in between, I guess, is like lions, and this basically just represents the will. So like at the level of the individual, it's like your discipline. It's like that which carries out whatever it's supposed to be carrying out, right? So that's at the level of the human, and then it gets very interesting at the level of society, because for Plato, this lion's, right, the enforcer of will, that's carrying out the will of the philosopher king. They end up having a whole, like, he dedicates a lot of time. So they're called the guardians. They're a whole class in Plato's conception of the Republic of citizens called the guardians. And like I said, he spends a lot of time developing this idea. And the reason I want to linger on it is because I think it's very interesting, almost from like, the word that comes to mind is like culturally, anthropologically. Because since these are essentially like the extension of the philosopher king, they have very strict sort of rules placed on them. And Plato says the goal for the guardians is that they should be steeped in the laws of the republic like a dye, and that so they won't be washed out by those most powerful detergents, pain and fear and desire. So they're essentially like from birth, like he said, steeped in the laws like a dye. And so there's a lot of, like I said, really interesting anthropological stuff going on. So here's just some characteristics about what it is to be a guardian. So for one, you have no right to private property or any kind of personal profit at all. No private property. It's in many ways, by the way, when I say it's like an influential book, just obviously this is where people like Marx and Engels get some of their ideas for communism. It's almost like the ideally communist state. Because like I said, there's no such thing as property. Also, if you've read The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin, listen up. And if this interests you, check out The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. So, okay, so like I said, no property. On top of that, this is where it gets interesting. All the men are common to all the women, and all the women are common to all the men. So, and furthermore, same thing with children. The children are common to everybody, and the parents are common to everybody. And it's literally a rule that you cannot know your child. Because the idea is like by getting rid, like dissolving, like, you know, the personal ties and having this overall community, he says basically like when you think about it, when an individual, for instance, hurts their finger, right? The whole organism, he says, is aware of the pain of the part. So he says the idea of the guardians is that they're going to be just almost like literally, it's kind of like a super organism. Like the psychology of this would be so interesting. But the idea is that when one person suffers or does well, they would suffer or rejoice accordingly. So that's his whole idea of the guardians, which I like. He actually spends a lot of time fleshing out. There's some you know, questionable stuff. Does he say that we should breed them like livestock, a little bit eugenics? He said the ones that can't. He says the ones that can't hang are disposed of. And don't even get me started on the translation issues and everything, because it could mean what, you know, the bad version of it, or they're just like, they're not part of that community and they just get released. That's what I'm pretty sure that's what my Penguin footnote said. It's like, you know, that sounded bad, but what he meant is just like get released back into, not released, that makes it sound bad, but just go to live, like be a normie, be a one of the heads of the many-headed beast. There was another thing I want to talk about, or just in general, like something I noticed during my reading experience of the Republic is that it literally sounds like the relevance of this today is so crazy. Like the things he's writing about literally sound like he's talking about today's day and age, which is just crazy because it's, you know, it's almost 2,500, 2,000, think about 100, even, bro, old heads are so old, and then that's not even that old compared to this old head. But okay, so yeah, this part is kind of, I'm curious how people react to this one. Okay, so Plato towards the beginning, he actually starts going through all the types of governments, talking about why they won't work. And he starts with democracy. And Plato's not happy about democracy at this point because democracy, and it's facts, this is true. Democracy has got what Socrates killed. Everybody took a vote. Yes, we should indeed kill Socrates because he's corrupting the youth. Socrates drank that Hemlock, and RIP to the bro. Hold up. Real shit. Basically what Plato says at this point is he's like, when you democracy in its ideal form is basically letting the many-headed beast choose who's in charge. And when that happens, he would just point out the simple fact that, like, for instance, you get a presidential candidate, at least here in the US, you know, but I think it applies really kind of everywhere. But just, and I'm not even going to get into this politically, but just as a fact, Donald Trump, of course, that's the elephant in the room. Bro is like a bumbling, spray tan, washed up, reality narcissist fucking loser. Like he's just a nerd loser to me, like as an individual. I'm not talking about the politics, and again, reality washed up TV star, but he cracks like stupid jokes and people vote for, like, that's some shit that Plato would be like, yeah, that, so when you let them choose, this is what you're gonna get. And if you just look around you today, the many-headed beast is at play. So down with democracy, boom, that's no good. Then he says oligarchy, which I think is honestly still just as applicable today. And he basically, and this is what I mean where it's crazy, like bro sounds like he's talking about today's society for real. Because he says in an oligarchy, wealth is basically the most important thing. And what happens is there's like a very small amount of people that start out extremely wealthy. But he says the money is basically going to beget them wanting more and more money. And they're going to become so obsessed with it, they're going to start distorting and perverting the laws in order that they can make more money. And then so, you know, does that sound familiar? Does that ring a bell? Okay, and then this is the really crazy part, because it's like, I didn't even know they had that sophisticated of an economy back then. But he says in an oligarchy, what's going to happen is you're going to have these like poisoned money lenders giving out these poisoned loans where it's like, he literally describes it in terms of like the interest rate is so absurd and they're exploiting people who they know are super poor, and eventually, you know, like the tax becomes more than even than the initial sum lent and all that shit. So he's like decrying these poisoned loans, which is exactly like what a credit card is, where you have like 20% and it compounds, and then you have like student debt, medical school debt, all that shit, which you kind of need to get a good, anyway. So that part was just crazy. And then he makes this point again, which is basically Marxist in its like approach. He points out too that the funny part is the masses, once assembled, are supreme and could easily overthrow the government and come up with whatever alternative they wanted to. But what they do is that the government makes them like basically so poor that they're forced to attend to their daily bread and basically have no time or energy to revolt, which I feel like is very much the spirit of the times of today, where just, I feel like nobody's politically satisfied. But what are you supposed to do about it? Like when you wake up, you gotta work 9 to 5 at least, you gotta drive home, you gotta cook some dinner, this, that, and the other. And then next thing you know, like God forbid you wanna relax for a little, like, you know, that whole thing. Like I said, this, honestly, I would encourage people to read this book, even almost just like politically, and that's coming from someone who I really kind of stay away from that stuff as much as I can, but it's just like a wake-up call, like holy shit, yeah, that's crazy. So yeah, that's the Republic for you. I mean, there's honestly so much I could talk about. Like I said, the stuff with like the virtue ethics, like the basically avoiding, like I said, avoiding vice, pursuing virtue, because when you indulge in the virtues, and like again, he sounds literally Buddhist when he's saying this, and like I said, the nature of samsara, where it's just the second you satisfy one pleasure, it basically just falls through your hand like sand, and then you need another one and another one and another one, and it's just endless. And like getting more money and more power is not, in fact, it just deepens the circle. And then Plato is saying too that like once you get so used to indulging in pleasure so much, he basically says, like, he makes a comparison where he says just as like a healthy person who falls ill is like they didn't realize it, but the greatest good is, you know, having good health. And someone who's like chronic pain is like I didn't know it, but like relief from pain, relief from pain is like the greatest good that there is. He says, so too will, once you stop getting this endless stream of pleasure, he says, eventually the rest from pleasure will be painful. So like, in just a whole element, almost very stoic actually is what it is. Because like I said, I'm skipping over huge parts of this. Like I would love to talk about like the whole thought experiment of the ring of Gyges, where basically you put this ring on and it makes you invisible. Would it benefit you to basically go do all kind of crimes, act self-interestedly at the behest, that's not even a word, but at the detriment of other, basically like kind of the thought experiment in the beginning. So the ring of Gyges, so super cool stuff, but I do have to talk about the allegory of the cave, and I'll just explain it. So everyone's probably like heard of the allegory of the cave. This is basically like what movies like The Matrix, again, the cultural impact of this book is just everywhere, but like things like that, basically the nature of reality. So how he sets it up is, imagine you're in a cave, or imagine there's people in a cave like that are just chained to the rocks, and they're just forced to like look in front of them, and then behind them is a fire, and there's this sort of like shadow puppet play taking place before their eyes on the cave. So there's like these dancing shadows, or just whatever, moving shadows, and because they've like only seen that, they mistake this for reality. But what you could do, if you could somehow break the chains, right, and like get out, turn around and see everything for what it is, and ascend to like the real world and the actual world around you, then it's like that. Yeah, so my memory card got full, believe it or not, probably because I was yapping too much, but I had to download it. And then like I've been getting interrupted by my landlord too, be back and forth and shit. So anyway, all of that's to say, I lost all the momentum. I forgot exactly where I was at, but I'm pretty sure I set up the allegory of the cave. And the idea is that the shadows upon the wall, right, for them in our everyday life is like basically the everyday world of sensation and perception. Like the world of constantly ephemeral changing things, that's the world of shadow and illusion. And the idea is that once you do philosophy, that's the equivalent of breaking out of your chains and ascending into the cave and looking at the real world, right? Finding real truths, eternal truths. about the nature of the universe, right? That's, to him, that's the ascension of the cave into the real world. And then the light, right? It's not this fake little firelight. It's a real, right? It's the sun. It's the light of the true sun. And for him, and it's a very apropos metaphor, because you can never really quite look direct. This is a big theme of mysticism and transcendence just in general. You can never quite look directly at the sun. You can never quite make actual contact with the thing in itself. But the idea is that the good is what he calls, the sun is what he calls like the good, or like, it's kind of unclear, like the good, the realm of forms, God, it's kind of all the same. It's basically the transcendent principle. So Plato has a lot of really great ideas in this book, obviously. And then the whole thing, like this whole book is written, I just have to make a note in terms of like the style, not even style, well, yes, style, but like also format. Like this book would be completely different. Because what I'm trying to say is, it's all written in Socratic dialogue, right? So it's all of this. It's not like he's like writing a treatise or anything like that. It's like actually, like I said, there's like real story elements. Like there's actual characters in this book whose personalities you get to see come out. The idea of the Socratic dialogue too is so, it works so well with the idea of just, I guess, like deductive reasoning, because it's like you would start, you know, this is like the classic example. It's like, surely you would say all men are mortal. Well, yes, of course I would say that. And you would admit Socrates is a man. Well, yes, that's clear. Well, then Socrates is mortal, right? Like that type of logical reasoning. Socrates, what he does is he just like lays these like little breadcrumbs, because like that was a shitty little example, but he's coming up with the most like crazy arguments, and low key it is kind of facts where you're like, okay, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And then by the end of it, it's like, whoa, hold up, that's crazy. But I will say some of his arguments are actually really bad. Like, bro basically argues against art. But really what he's talking about is representational art. Like if you're trying to just paint in terms of like a photograph, then it's like, well, at that point, that's like a copy of a copy, you know what I'm saying? But I don't know how you feel about more modern or like interpretive art, but he does say like we got to get rid of basically like Odysseus and Achilles having their laments. He's like, yeah, he's basically like, that's some pussy shit. We definitely cannot let our people read that or they're gonna grow up like wussies. So no Odyssey and no Iliad. Homer's dope, but he's got to go. So he, and like the whole breeding like guardians thing was interesting. He's got some hot takes, but he's actually got some a lot of really good stuff too. So. I could say 1,000,001 more things. That's it though. Only 1,000,000. Couldn't hit 1,000,002, but nah. This is a dope ass book. I'm sure some of you have read this or parts of it. So let me know what you think. What should I read next of Plato? I'm pretty sure. I mean, I've read excerpts and little essays and stuff, but what should I read next by Plato? And yeah, Big Nate is back. So thank you for watching Big Nate's Book Reviews, home of the best book reviews.